Reaction to the end of the George Zimmerman trial continues to reverberate across the country. In a case that sparked intense debate about race and violence, emotions are running even higher after the verdict.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
The Neighborhood Watch volunteer was acquitted in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teen. Zimmerman's attorneys argued he shot Martin in self-defense after being attacked. Prosecutors were trying to paint Zimmerman as a wannabe cop that went too far by profiling, following, and then shooting Martin.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Zimmerman's acquittal sparked demonstrations in many cities. People outraged by the not guilty verdict are calling for the Justice Department to file a civil rights lawsuit. The trial was also the focus of many Sunday services. Derek Blakely from our CBS affiliate in Chicago has reaction from one community.
Worshippers arrived at Trinity Church of Christ with Trayvon Martin on their minds, frustration and sadness in their hearts.
I'm just truly devastated by the miscarriage of justice with the verdict.
Our justice system has not progressed. It's actually, pretty much the same as it was when Emmett Till got, killed.
Both Trinity worshipers and ministers wore hoodies in honor of Martin. And Pastor Otis Moss says the verdict prompted a chilling question from his own 12-year-old son, Elijah.
With a slight tremble in his voice, he said, "Daddy, am I next?"
Young black men feeling endangered and seen as a danger as well.
Just knowing that I'm perceived to be violent, as a threat, thuggish in any type of way without even engaging me in conversation is indeed an issue that needs to be addressed.
Activists now calling for federal civil rights charges against Zimmerman.
When it's real dark, the stars shine most clearly. This will serve as a stimulus to wake up and to fight back.
Others warn today's so-called hoodie Sabbath may be a start, but it's only that.
Young people in the hood aren't interested in a lot of symbolism. They want people to really connect and show that they care.
That was Derek Blakely from our CBS affiliate in Chicago. Joining us this morning is Paul Batista, criminal defense attorney. And Paul, it's so good to have you with us here this morning.
Good morning, Alexis.
Now, you say you were not surprised by this not guilty verdict. Why?
Well, I did watch the trial pretty carefully. When you've been doing trials as long as I have, you begin to see a pattern in a case. And while it's always hard to predict a jury, there are some things that you can see as you go along. The case was presented, and in fact was a weak case. The prosecution, remember, had a structural defect, I think, in the case. They had to rely for witnesses on investigators who early on decided that George Zimmerman had acted in self-defense and should not be prosecuted. So the prosecution team had to deal with witnesses who frankly appear to like George Zimmerman. And there were those structural weaknesses inherent in the case.
Well, the defense obviously did something right, and all they really needed to do was plant that seed of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors to have George Zimmerman go free. What did they do right?
Well, they mounted a defense. Frankly, I might not have done what they did, but they brought on 18 witnesses who were compelling witnesses. Think, for example, contrast the defense's forensic expert, Dr. DeMaio, with the forensic experts the prosecution used. Dr. DeMaio was experienced, he was persuasive, he was thorough. On the other side, the prosecution side, we had a forensic expert who didn't remember the autopsy that he performed. Cases that go in weak are going to result in acquittals, and that's what happened here.
Well, some thought the prosecution came out strong, and then things started to flounder. Where did the prosecution go wrong? Why were they weak?
Well, they really did come out strong. John Guy, the mid-level prosecutor, presented a great opening argument. In contrast, the defense presented a weak opening argument with the ludicrous knock-knock joke.
Right.
They later redeemed themselves. The witnesses began to melt, so to speak, almost as soon as they were presented. John Good, one of the eyewitnesses, began testifying that he saw Trayvon Martin on top of George Zimmerman. This was the earliest, one of the earliest prosecution witnesses. And oddly, the prosecution began treating him as a hostile witness. They lost control of their case. Great opening statement. You know, we can all make great opening statements.
Right.
But when you're a lawyer in the field, you've got to deliver on those opening statements.
And back it up for those
jurors. And
jurors.
back it up. And it in my eyes, you know, putting aside whether George Zimmerman should have been out there, whether he should have been walking around locked and loaded, as John Guy said in the opening statement, put all of that aside. The evidence went in weakly, and then the defense came forward with a case that sounded as thoroughly prepared as a prosecution case. So
what happens now? The federal government coming out and saying, we're actually investigating this case. What can that lead to?
Well, in theory, the U.S. Justice Department can indict George Zimmerman for criminal civil rights violations, in theory. And in fact, we've seen press releases today where the Justice Department is reminding the public that it has an open investigation. I've been around for a long time, unfortunately, and I have seen, for example, the Rodney King case where the police were acquitted by a local jury in Los Angeles. That was followed by a federal criminal indictment, and that case kind of ended in the ground. It didn't really get anywhere. My guess is that we will not see a federal criminal indictment of George Zimmerman. Among other things, he is not a public official. He may be a wannabe cop, but he's not a cop.
So even though a lot of controversy surrounding this case in a politically charged case, you're still thinking, well, it's unlikely we'll see anything from the feds.
I'm thinking like a lawyer, and I know how the federal government operates in evaluating a prosecution. It will not bring a case that it believes it will lose.
But you'd imagine we'd see a civil case follow.
Well, that's a different species, by the family.
Right.
We saw that the Goldman and Brown families sued O.J. Simpson and won that case. They got a $25 million verdict on which they have not collected one dime. George Zimmerman has no money.
And what happens to George Zimmerman now? I mean, this is a man who's not well liked in many circles. What happens to him?
I assume he has to go into his own kind of witness protection program. He may want to join Mr. Snowden in some country where he's immune from any kind of. I feel badly for him, but he has to live out his life probably in anonymity. And looking over his shoulder all the time.
And about that civil case, I mean, the fact that the families don't see a dime, that's not what it's about for them. It is about seeking justice, and if they didn't find it on the criminal level, they want to find it in some courtroom.
Oh, certainly, I would expect the family will bring a civil lawsuit against George Zimmerman for a wrongful death. And yes, they know that George Zimmerman doesn't have any money. But there certainly is a catharsis involved in getting a jury to determine, you did it, you killed our child.
Right.
And that may be what
we'll
they're
have to see. Certainly this is not the end, and it'll be developing in the coming days. But Paul Batista, thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great day, Alexis.
You too. Thank you.